Hello everyone, welcome back to Study Room. In this video, we will be studying about transportation. In the previous videos, we had studied about digestion and how the nutrition is absorbed in that process. So after absorbing the nutrition, after absorbing the nutrients, how are these nutrients transported to different parts of the body? In this video, we will be studying about the transportation in human beings as well as in plants. So let's see how the transportation in human beings take place. The mode of transportation in human beings is blood. Blood consists of a fluid medium called plasma in which the cells are suspended. Cells namely RBCs, WBCs and the platelets. Plasma transports food, carbon dioxide and nitrogenous waste in dissolved form. Oxygen is carried by the red blood corpuscles. Many of other substances like salts are also transported by the blood. We thus need a pumping organ to push blood around the body, a network of tubes to reach all the tissues, and a system in place to ensure that this network can be repaired if damaged. So we have a master organ which helps in pumping this blood throughout the body and transport the nutrients from one place to another. And the organ that is the master organ is the heart, which is also called our pump. So here we will just study about the structure of heart. The heart has four chambers, namely two atria and two ventricles. In between the atria and ventricle on each side, we have an atrioventricular valve, and the right ventricle opens into the pulmonary artery and the left ventricle opens into the aorta. So these are all the parts of the heart. As you can see here, there is a pericardial space, and there's this node called the sinoatrial node, which basically is the origin of our heartbeat. Okay, and here there's a vena cava. So these veins carry the blood into the right atria, and then the blood then passes to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, the blood goes through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, and from the lungs, it comes back to the left atria through the pulmonary vein. And from the left atria, it passes on to the left ventricle, and the left ventricle again opens into the aorta, and the blood passes through the aorta and gets transported to different parts of the body. So here we can see how the structure of heart is. It is a muscular organ as big as our fist. So the size of the heart is as big as our fist. Next on, we'll be seeing the working of the heart. In this video, you can see that the heart pumps blood throughout the body, carrying oxygen and nutrients to every cell. It's this circulation of blood that is vital for sustaining life. The heart is an organ made up of several tough layers of muscle. The pericardium is a thin layer that covers the exterior, while the endocardium lines the inside walls. The heart is divided into four chambers, two upper and two lower. The upper chambers are known as the atrium, which receive blood coming into the heart, and the lower chambers are the ventricles that pump blood out of the heart. Between each chamber are valves that open and close and help keep the blood moving. They are the tricuspid, mitral, pulmonary and aortic valve. A pumping cycle starts when oxygen depleted blood returns to the heart after circulating throughout the body. The blood enters through the right atrium before flowing to the right ventricle. It's then pumped to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. Their blood is rejuvenated by air that's breathed in. The oxygen-rich blood returns to the heart through the left atrium, then it goes to the left ventricle. From there, by the way of the aorta artery, the fresh blood is pumped throughout the body. So the process repeats itself, and this process happens with every heartbeat. So as you can see that we have a process called double circulation. So what is double circulation? As we saw the working of the heart, here we can see that the working of the heart, the blood comes and passes through the heart 2 times. Okay, it comes through the vena cava once and then again goes to the lungs, and from the lungs it comes to the heart again for the second time, and then it passes through the aorta and then gets redistributed in the body. So this is how it happens. It's a process of double circulation as the blood passes through the heart twice during each cycle. Okay, so the circulatory system, we'll be talking about the circulatory system in different types of animals. For mammals and birds, the separation of the right side and the left side of the heart is useful to keep oxygenated and deoxygenated blood from mixing. In fishes, there are only 2 chambers, and the blood pumped to the gills is oxygenated there and passes directly to the rest of the body. So here you can see the difference. There is a difference between the number of chambers and then how the process of oxygenation and deoxygenation occurs. Up next, we have the type of circulatory system in amphibians and reptiles. These animals do not use energy to maintain body temperature, and body temperature depends on the temperature in the environment. So they have 3-chambered heart and can tolerate some mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So if you are asked that tell us the category of animals in which there is a 3-chambered heart and there's a mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood happens. So the answer will be amphibians and reptiles. So you have to remember the number of chambers that are present in each category of animals. Next up, we have the tubes, also known as the blood vessels. So as you all know that blood travels through arteries and veins. So these are the 2 kinds of vessels that we have in our body, and between the between when there's a change between an artery and a vein, there's this network of vessels that occur, and this network is known as capillary. So you can see that there's this is a vein. The blue colored portion is vein, and the vein carries deoxygenated blood, whereas the red color portion is the artery, and the artery carries oxygenated blood. You can also see the difference in structure of the artery and the vein. So the arteries have thick walls and the veins have thin walls. As you can see, the veins have thin walls. The arteries have very small lumen, but the veins have larger lumen. And between the veins and the arteries, as we discussed before, there's a network of vessels present, and this thin network of vessels is called as capillaries. Next up, we have the difference between the arteries and the veins in a tabulated manner. As you can see here, in arteries are thick walled. Blood under high pressure flows in arteries and they have a narrow lumen. But in veins are thin walled and blood is under low pressure. Blood flows under very low pressure and veins have a wide lumen. Arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood. But there is an exception in both of them. The exception is pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. So what happens is the pulmonary artery takes away the blood from the right ventricle of the heart to the lungs. So this artery carries deoxygenated blood, and this is a very unique thing that we need to remember, and you will be asked in the examination that name the artery which carries deoxygenated blood, and you will have to say the answer as the pulmonary artery. And the vice versa happens in veins as well. So the vein carrying the blood from the lungs to the heart is known as the pulmonary vein, and it carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. So that is how there's a difference, there's a unique exception that is present in the case of arteries and veins. And arteries would generally remain open even if blood flow stops because of muscular structure. But veins collapses when blood flow stops. So these are the very important differences between arteries and veins. And when you are asked to mention the differences, you have to form a table-like manner. You have to write the differences in a table-like manner as given here, right? Next, we have blood pressure. So, what is blood pressure? The force that blood exerts against the wall of a vessel is called blood pressure. The pressure of blood inside the artery during ventricular systole or contraction is called systolic pressure, and pressure in artery during ventricular diastole or relaxation is called diastolic pressure. So what happens is, what is ventricular systole? When the ventricles contract, okay, when the ventricles pump blood from the ventricles to the pulmonary artery or the aorta, we have this condition called as the ventricular systole, and the pressure that is exerted in the ventricles are known as systolic pressure. And when the ventricles relax, like when the ventricles relax and there is a pressure in the artery, so this pressure is known as the diastolic pressure. Okay. Next up, we have how we can measure the blood pressure. So here you can see that there is this monitor that is present, and this monitor, there is this machine, okay, this is blood pressure machine. It is also known as sphygmomanometer, okay. Sphygmomanometer. So this machine is available both in the digital format as well as in the manual format. Like there is a mechanical kind of a machine in which you can measure the blood pressure. So in this digital, as you can see here, the digital sphygmomanometer is given here. In that, what you have to do is you have to wrap the cuff around the portion of your just above your elbow, the portion of your hand just above your elbow, and then you have to measure the blood pressure. You can easily measure the blood pressure, and just discuss before what the blood pressure is and how can we measure it, and what is the significance of different kinds of pressure, like the systolic phase and the diastolic phase. The systolic phase gives the systolic pressure and the diastolic phase gives the diastolic pressure. And here you can see how the systolic pressure has been mentioned here 120, and the diastolic pressure has been mentioned here as 75. Also here you can measure the pulse rate also. The pulse rate is here 70, right? Up next, we will be talking about hypertension. High blood pressure is also called as hypertension and is caused by the contraction of arterioles, which results in the increased resistance of blood flow. So there is a resistance of blood flow is present in the arterioles, and hence there is this condition of high blood pressure called as hypertension. It can lead to the rupture of an artery and internal bleeding. So the hypertension is a condition when we have an increased blood pressure due to the constriction of arterioles, and it results into an increased resistance of blood flow. Now I'll be talking about the role of platelets and lymph. So platelet cells are the cells which circulate around the body and plug the leaks by helping to clot the blood at these points of injury. Okay, so there's this platelets are present which plug the leaks that are caused, okay, and help in clotting of blood. So these are the two functions of platelet cells. They plug the leaks and they help in the clotting of blood at the points where the blood vessels are injured. Okay. Next up, we have lymph. So what is lymph? Lymph is another type of fluid which is also involved in transportation. Now, through the walls of the pores present in the walls of the capillaries, we have some amount of plasma. Up next, we'll be talking about lymph. So lymph is another type of fluid which is also involved in transportation. So through the pores present in the walls of the capillaries, some amount of plasma. Like there are certain pores present in the walls of the capillaries, right? So from there, some amount of plasma, proteins and blood cells escape into the intercellular spaces, okay, in the tissues to form the tissue fluid or lymph. Lymph is also known as lymph is also known as tissue fluid, okay. So the plasma, some amount of plasma, proteins and blood cells, okay, they escape out of the blood capillaries and they form the tissue fluid or lymph. So it is similar to blood plasma, but it is colorless and contains less protein. So it is very similar to blood plasma, but it is colorless and contains very less proteins. Okay, the lymph drains into lymphatic capillaries. So the lymph further drains into, there are certain capillaries known as the lymphatic capillaries from the intercellular spaces which join to form large lymph vessels. Okay, so there are certain large lymph vessels. So since like these are the capillaries, okay, these are the capillaries. From here the lymph oozes out. This is the intercellular space, okay, intercellular space. Okay, and this lymph oozes out from here, then they get transferred into lymphatic capillaries. Okay, these are the lymphatic capillaries which go side by side with the vessel, and then these lymphatic capillaries further join into a larger vessels, okay, larger lymph vessels. So this is how, you know, the plasma and the blood cells and proteins, they ooze out into the intercellular space and they get transferred into the lymphatic capillaries. Lymph carries digested and absorbed fat for intestine and drains excess fluid from extracellular space back into the blood. Okay, so what does lymph do? Lymph has a certain function. It carries digested and absorbed fat. Okay, this is a very certain function and very unique function that lymph has, and it from the intestine and drains. There's a second function that it has, that it drains the excess fluid from extracellular space back into the blood. So this is how lymph works. Okay. Next, we'll be talking about, did you know that each day your heart pumps about 2000 gallons of blood? So this is a capacity, you know, how the blood pumps, and the human heart weighs less than 1 pound. So human heart is very like it is very light and it weighs less than 1 pound, but a man's heart is typically 2 ounces heavier than a woman's. So there is a difference between the heart of a man and a woman, because the heart of a man is larger, or it is heavier, as we can say, it is heavier as compared to the women's heart. Okay, next up we have, what is a necessity of transportation in plants. So we will be studying about the transportation in plants here, and we will be understanding that why the transportation in plants is necessary. Energy needs differ between different body designs. Okay, so plants do not move, as we all know that plants do not move, and plants bodies have a large proportion of dead cells in many tissues. Okay, so they have a large proportion of dead cells. As a result, plants have low energy needs. So that is why, since they have so much of dead cells, so that is why they have very low energy needs and can use relatively slow transport system. So they, since our blood, as you can see that the heart pumps blood nearly around 72 times in a minute, right? So it is a very fast process. But in plants, since they do not have so many living cells, okay, human beings have so many living cells, but plants have proportion of dead cells. So that is why their energy requirement is very low. So they have very slow transport systems. The distances over which transport systems have to operate, however, can be very large in plants, such as very tall trees. Okay, so they have like but the distance is very large. Okay, sometimes like you can always see that the body of a human being is very small as compared to as you see the large trees, the big trees. Okay, so they have a very large area to cover. So that is also a difference between the type of transportation between the humans and the plants. So in transportation in plants, we'll be studying about how how there is this process of transportation in plants. So there are two elements called as xylem. We have the xylem and the phloem, which are our vascular tissues, and they are responsible for transporting water and food respectively. So they transport water and food separately. Okay, the xylem is responsible for the transport of water, and the phloem is responsible for the transport of food. So the xylem moves water and minerals obtained from the soil to the roots and then to the entire body. Okay, body of the plant. And the phloem transports products of photosynthesis from the leaves where they are synthesized to other parts of the plant. So what happens is if there's this plant, okay, and it has roots, okay. If a plant has roots, you can see here. So water molecules, these are the water molecules, okay. So the roots absorb the water molecules, and there's this system called xylem, okay. There's this vascular bundle, there's this xylem, and these water molecules travel through the xylem to the upper part of the leaf. Just imagine there's a leaf here. So the xylem will go and deliver the water to the leaf. So there's this constant pressure that is built here, and there's this constantly the water keeps on moving through the xylem to the other parts of the plant. And what happens with phloem? Phloem is it is responsible for transporting the food material. So what happens is there's this system, there's this tube, vascular bundle of phloem as well, which transport the food that is prepared here in the leaf. It transports the food to different parts of the plant, like the root, the shoot, the upper body of the plant. So it has a bidirectional flow. Okay, so what happens is the water gets absorbed through the root to the and is transported to the entire parts of the plant, and the phloem it transports the food material from the leaves to the other parts of the plant. Up next, we have the transportation. As you can see here, the xylem, the transportation of water is unidirectional, okay? And there is no end walls. Like there are no end walls, and the water and minerals, they get transported here, okay? So there are two components, water and mineral. Always remember this. Xylem is responsible for the transportation of water and mineral, and phloem is responsible for the transportation of food, okay? And water too. So here there is a two-way flow, okay? There's this two-way flow, but in xylem there's this unidirectional, only one way. Okay, so these are the differences between xylem and phloem. If somebody asks you what is the difference between xylem and phloem, first of all, it is a one-way flow, and phloem is a two-way flow. Xylem has no end walls, but phloem has end walls with perforations. Okay, xylem transport water and minerals, and phloem transport both food and water. So these are the three differences that you can spot out from the transportation in plants and between the xylem and the phloem. Okay. So let's see how transportation of water happens in plants. The xylem tissue, vessels and tracheids, these are the components of the xylem tissue, and they are present in roots, stems and leaves, and are interconnected to form a continuous system of water conducting channels reaching all parts of the plants. So evaporation of water molecules from the cells of a leaf creates a suction which pulls water from the xylem cells of the root. So as you can see, we had discussed before, so there is this constant pressure that is maintained here, okay? There is this root, and this is the water molecules. These are the water molecules present here, and this is the leaf. So what happens here, the water molecules evaporate from here, okay? So water molecules evaporate from here, but the leaves need water for photosynthesis. So what they do is, there's this pressure. So there's this pressure that is built here, that the water molecules are evaporating. So what they do is, they get water from these xylem, okay? So the water, since the water is getting transferred here continuously to the leaves, so there's this pressure built up here, okay? And the water is continuously transported from the soil through the roots to the leaves by the xylem vessels. Okay, so you can just see here that how it happens, and there's this proper suction pressure is built here for the transportation of water in plants. Also, the water and minerals are absorbed by plants through root hair. So water moves from high potential to lower potential. As you can see here, if this is a root, okay, if this is a root hair, okay, this is a root here, and these are water molecules present here. So water is in excess in soil, okay, and in root water is lower. There is a lower water potential. So what happens? The water moves from here to here. So there's this there's this transport of water from the soil to the roots. So, and it moves in a direction from higher potential to lower potential. There is a steady movement of water from soil to roots to xylem vessels and tracheids, creating a column of water that is steadily pushed forward. So as we mentioned before, so there is a column of water, like you can see the xylem here and the roots are here. So these water molecules will have a constant column. They'll build up a column, okay, and due to the pressure that we have here, and they'll build up a column, and that is how the movement of water happens in plants. We'll be talking about a phenomena called as transpiration. In transpiration, what happens is there's a loss of water in the form of vapor from the aerial parts of the plant, and this phenomena is known as transpiration. So as we had discussed before, so there is this whole evaporation of water from the aerial parts, evaporation of water from the leaves and the aerial parts of the plants, and that is how there's this pressure built in the xylem vessels, and the pressure is built indirectly into the roots also. So there's this root pressure that is built. So transpiration helps in the absorption of water and minerals from the soil. It also helps in temperature regulation. This creates a pull of water from soil to roots. It proves that a continuous water transport system exists from the roots to the leaves. So as we had discussed before, so there is this continuous system that is built between the roots and the leaves. So this is due to the phenomena called transpiration. So you just need to remember that there's this continuous flow of water from the soil to the leaves, and this happens due to the phenomena called as transpiration when the water molecules are evaporated from the aerial parts of the plant. So there's this pressure that is built up, and due to this pressure, the water and the minerals from the soil are transported into the roots, and from the roots they are transported to the leaves through the xylem vessels. So you can see here how transpiration happens. In the leaves, the stomata are open during the day, and at that time, the evaporation due to the temperature outside, the evaporation occurs from the aerial parts of the plant through the stomata. The water vaporizes into the atmosphere, and that is how a pressure is built up from the in the successive vessels. A pressure is built up, and in turn a pressure is built up at the root area. So here a root pressure is built up, and then the water molecules and the minerals are pushed into the root due to the root pressure, and that is how a continuous chain of water transport is built up from the root to the leaves through the xylem vessels. Now, what is translocation? The products of photosynthesis are moved from leaves to other parts of the plant. This transport of soluble products of photosynthesis is called translocation, and it occurs in the part of the vascular tissue known as phloem. In the spring, for example, in the spring, sugar stored in root or stem tissue would be transported to the buds, which need energy to grow. So there's this proper mechanism to transport the soluble products of photosynthesis, and this mechanism is known as translocation, and it happens with the help of the vascular tissue called phloem. As you can see here in the example, it is given that in the spring, sugar stored in root or stem tissue would be transported to the buds. Okay, so when this sugar is stored in different parts of the plant, and that sugar is transported to other parts of the other newly growing parts of the plant, and since they need energy, that is why these sugars are translocated into from one part of the plant to the other part of the plant, and this is the process called translocation. The phloem also transports amino acids and other substances which are delivered to the storage organs of the roots, fruits, and seeds and to growing organs. The translocation of food occurs via sieve tubes with adjacent companion cells both in upward and downward direction. Okay, material like sucrose is transferred from phloem tissue using energy from ATP. So what happens is the transport of food material, they happen bidirectionally, as we had before earlier also we had studied that in phloem the transport of food material happens bidirectional way, right? Like in both the ways they can go, and like there is this whole translocation processes going on, and it occurs via the component called sieve tubes. Okay, and hence the adjacent companion cells also, like they also help in translocating the food. Okay, so that is how there is this delivery of food from one part of the plant to the other parts of the plant is carried on. Up next we have the questions. So the first question is, what are the components of the transport system in human beings? What are the functions of these components? So first of all, the first component, the master organ that we had studied about, was heart, and it pumps the oxygenated blood throughout the body and receives the deoxygenated blood from the various body parts and sends this impure blood to the lungs for oxygenation. Secondly, we had blood. Blood is the main medium of transportation. Heart is just the pumping organ, but blood is the main medium of transportation, protection, and regulation. Blood transports oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and rest of the body. Nutrients from digestive tract and storage sites of the rest of the body are transported from one place to another. Now, blood vessels are also a part of this component, like of the whole system, and they transport the blood throughout the body. So there are three components as we study. Heart is a pumping organ, and then we have the blood which is a pump, which is the transport medium, and we have the blood vessels which help in the transportation of this blood. Okay, so these are the three components. Next up we have question number 2. What is question number 2? Why is it necessary to separate oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in mammals and blood? Why is it important? Just because the circulatory system is more efficient in them and can maintain their constant body temperature. So in order to do this, they have this it is very very necessary in them to separate the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. The next question that we have is, what are the components of the transport system in highly organized plants? So the components of the transport system is, first of all we had xylem. So xylem has different components called as the xylem parenchyma, xylem fibers, tracheids, and vessels. And we have the phloem, which transports the food, and the phloem also has different components called the phloem parenchyma, phloem fibers, sieve tubes, and companion cells. So these xylem is used for the transport of water and minerals, and phloem is used for the transport of food. Up next, we have the question, what are the water and minerals? How are the water and mineral transported in plants? So water and minerals are transported in the plants through xylem vessels. And how is this done? When there's a root pressure, when there is a pressure in the root, okay, so there's this root pressure that happens, there's a pressure in the root, and then there's this transpiration also that goes on in the leaves. Okay, so due to this transpiration, there's this transpiration pull that happens, and there's this pressure that is built up whole here, root pressure is built up, there's this transpiration pull, and through osmosis the water and minerals in the soil get into the root and are transported through the xylem vessels to the leaves. So that is how the water and minerals are transported in plants. The last question that we have is, how is food transported in plants? So the medium of transportation of food is phloem, and the process that is involved is known as translocation. So the sieve tube and companion cells, both are the components of phloem. They help in transporting the food in upward and downward directions, okay, as we discussed before. And the sucrose-like materials are transported using energy from ATP and osmotic pressure, which is caused due to water. This pressure moves the material in the phloem to tissues which have less pressure. So there's this whole concept of high pressure to low pressure, where the food is translocated from the area of high pressure to the area of low pressure. So that is how, the high concentration to the area of low concentration happens, and the food is transported from one part of the plant to the other parts of the plant. So this is all about transportation in human beings and plants. Thank you for listening to the lecture. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much.